I totally get that the Cowboys can be very easy to hate, especially if you're not a Cowboys fan. You get tired of them always being featured prominently on national television in featured games and featured spots. You get tired of hearing about them all the time when they're frankly not all that particularly relevant, especially based off of their on field performance for the large part over the past mostly 2 decades. It's understandable. And it's also understandable why people can look at the Cowboys when they re sign a player, give a player big money, and they question it, especially because this is a Cowboys organization that has had trouble managing the salary cap for years now. They always seem to be up against the cap. And some of that is because they will try and go out and buy some players, but more so because they will overpay their own guys way too much for way too damn long when it frankly isn't merited, justified, deserved. So when you hear that the Cowboys have given Zach Martin, their first round pick from 2014, a big time contract extension, it is somewhat understandable why some people, some media, some fans will question that deal a little bit. For a team that has trouble managing to the salary cap year in and year out, a team that is kind of always against the salary cap year in and year out, why would you be willing to give out big money to a guard? Regardless of how that good or what that guard is, why would you give that player big time money? Why would you sit there and pay him a whole hell of a lot and tie up a percentage of your salary cap into that one position that in theory is not all that important? It's not a premier position like a quarterback, like a number one wide receiver, like a shutdown man cover corner, like a edge rusher. Those are the positions, left tackle. Those are the positions you typically see guys get paid the most money because they are thought of to be the most important, the most premier positions in the National Football League. So it can make sense even at times when you might overpay a guy a little bit in one of those spaces because the market conditions kind of dictate that you have to. But when it comes to the Cowboys re-signing Zach Martin and giving him a shit ton of money, the fact is they had to do it. The fact is, if you were in charge of the Cowboys, you'd have probably done the same thing if you had any football brain matter in your head whatsoever. And the Cowboys actually did something smart here. Look, I understand guard is not exactly a premier position. I also understand that the Cowboys, looking at the way they're constructed, easily everybody acknowledges the true strength of that football team is their offensive line. So you feel like if you get rid of just one of those guys to save some salary cap and reinvest in other places on offense and defense, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. And I don't necessarily disagree with that logic. You could let a Zach Martin go and still be okay on your offensive line, still have a really good offensive line unit. Especially if Lyle Collins finally sticks at one position he develops. If second-round pick Connor Williams could come in and be an impact player at guard, you could potentially do without Zach Martin and be okay, and probably still be more than okay. Especially when you look at the Cowboys last year and you say, well, when Tyron Smith went down, he's the most important offensive lineman they have. When he went down, it was an entirely different team. That is also true. Tyron Smith is the best offensive lineman they have, and more importantly, the most important offensive lineman that the Dallas Cowboys have. But this is something that when other organizations do it, we applaud them for. Yes, it's a guard, and yes, it's a lot of money. But frankly, if a guy is worth anything anyways, you're going to have to pay him big-time money. And at some point in time, when it comes to how the whole NFL game should work, part of the purpose is to draft and develop and cultivate your own young talent and then re-sign them and keep them in the fold for 8, 10 years or more. That's what the Cowboys are doing here with Zach Martin. It's not like they're paying for a one-year wonder. It's not like they're paying for somebody that just gave you bits and spurts and gave you some potential. This is a guy that's been a top-flight interior lineman in the league since he got into it day one in 2014. You have 4 years of a body of work that indicate this guy is a Pro Bowl, borderline all-pro type of talent on the interior of the Cowboys offensive line. You also look at it from an old school mentality of when the Cowboys were dominant in the early and mid 90s. What did they have going for them? What was truly the strength of their football team? Sure, you had Hall of Famers and the Three Amigos and Troy Aikman and Emmitt Smith and Michael Irvin. But everybody with a brain knows that it was the offensive line that set the tone. It was the offensive line that allowed the Cowboys to do everything offensively that helped the team defensively, in part by keeping the defense off the damn field. It was the Eric Williams and the Nate Newtons and the Larry Allens and the Mark Tuanes and the Stepnoskis and all those guys They were the ones that helped the Cowboys be the Cowboys and be that dynasty that won 3 Super Bowls in a 4-year stretch. All those other Hall of Famers at the skill positions are great and nice and wonderful, but you're not winning a single Super Bowl without that offensive line that they had. So it makes sense from Jerry Jones's standpoint, Stephen Jones's standpoint. You go back to what helped you be the most successful. What helped them be the most successful was a team in the 90s that had a dominant offensive line that could impose their will on opposing defenses, and they could run the ball down your throat with Emmitt Smith. So now you see, in modern times, the Cowboys kind of being constructed in that way. Would you sit there and allow Nate Newton or Larry Allen in the peak of their career to go somewhere else? I wouldn't think so. So why in the heck would you allow Zach Martin to go anywhere else? And even when you talk about the amount of money invested in this deal, you look at the length of the term. What was it, like 6 years, 80-something million? 40 million or so of that is guaranteed. So you just break that out over 3 or 4 seasons. That's really what the contract is. Yes, it's a lot of money, and yes, it's for an interior lineman. But because of the Cowboys, what their identity is, and more importantly, when they're at their best, what their identity needs to be, they absolutely have to keep a guy like Zach Martin in the fold, especially when you look at this team heading into 2018. You don't know what you're going to get at the wide receiver position. So you're hoping Zeke can stay on the field all year and that you can better protect for Dak Prescott. You can open up even bigger holes for Ezekiel Elliott. The fact of the matter is there are a lot of things to criticize the Cowboys about. There are a lot of things to question about what the Cowboys do. But they did exactly what they do here, are supposed to do here. You draft a really good player, and you keep him in the damn fold. That's how this whole game is supposed to work. You don't go out and buy a bunch of free agents. Don't go out there and make a bunch of big splashy trades in the NFL, because more often than not, frankly, that doesn't work. You draft and develop and keep your team in place. And the Cowboys should be applauded for this. Now you've got Tyron Smith, Travis Frederick, and Zach Martin all in the fold for years to come. You've got young guys like La'el Collins and Connor Williams in the fold potentially for years to come. You've got a young quarterback in Dak Prescott. You've got a young stud running back in Ezekiel Elliott. You've got a lot of the elements there for a Cowboys offense that could potentially help this team at some point down the road win a Super Bowl, whether you want to acknowledge it, like it, or admit to it or not. I would much rather see them spend big money on a Zach Martin than, let's say, when they were spending big money on a washed-up, injury-prone has-been in Dez Bryant. Like, who would you rather give big money to? That's why you move on from guys like Dez Bryant so you could keep the core fundamentally important players like Zach Martin. This is a really good deal for the Cowboys long-term. You have some certainty about Zach Martin being a highly productive player at his position throughout the life of this contract. He's a guy that plays at a very, very high level and is incredibly important to the identity of who the Cowboys are. You got to keep that strength as much as you possibly can, especially to compensate potentially for some other deficiencies you have both on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. To me, this was an absolute no-brainer. I couldn't believe people were so up in arms or questioning the amount of money that was given Zach Martin here, because ultimately for the Cowboys, he is worth every single penny. And again, I come back to, just because you don't like the Cowboys doesn't change the fact that they did what a good organization is supposed to do. You draft a stud, you keep the stud. It's that simple.